As a girl of 14 or 15, my family had a tradition of camping in a secluded state park. It was a yearly escape into the wilderness, far from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Every night, my best friend and I embarked on an eerie journey into the heart of the woods. We called it the ritual, and it was a thrilling adventure that pushed the boundaries of our courage. On this particular night, a chilling air hung over the forest. The moon cast eerie shadows through the thick canopy of trees, and the stars were obscured by ominous clouds. Despite the darkness that surrounded us, we were determined to explore deeper into the woods than ever before. We were armed with nothing but flashlights, and we delighted in testing our bravery by navigating with them turned off. Half a mile from the nearest campsite, as we moved in silence, we heard soft, barely audible whispers behind us. Goosebumps prickled my skin, and my heart pounded as I exchanged a wary glance with my friend. We abruptly halted, and with trembling hands, we switched our flashlights back on. We scanned the darkness but saw nothing out of the ordinary. My pulse began to slow as I assumed it might have been the wind or the rustling of leaves. We decided to continue our journey, dismissing the unsettling whispers as mere figments of our imagination. However, fate had other plans for us. Just a few steps ahead, the sinister whispers returned, this time more distinct and malevolent. We stopped dead in our tracks, exchanging fearful glances. Our flashlights danced around, but the source of the whispers remained elusive. Summoning our courage, we decided to investigate further. We inched forward, listening intently to the ghostly utterances that seemed to surround us. That's when we finally saw it, a shadowy figure, a woman, crawling on the ground. She was dressed in dark, tattered clothes and covered in dirt, her long hair matted and tangled. My friend and I exchanged horrified glances, our hearts pounding in our chests. The woman continued to whisper incoherent words, her voice filled with an eerie and haunting cadence. We could feel the hair on our necks stand on end as we watched this surreal sight unfold before us. Fear and curiosity battled within us as we debated our next move. Finally, we mustered the courage to approach her. Our flashlights cast eerie shadows on her trembling form. As we drew closer, the woman suddenly stopped whispering and looked up at us. Her eyes were wild, her face etched with confusion and despair. She whispered softly, "I'm looking for my campsite." We exchanged anxious glances once more, our hearts heavy with apprehension. The woman stood up, her movements unsteady and erratic. It was then that we realized the gravity of the situation. She was disoriented, lost, and seemed to be under the influence of something far more sinister than just darkness. We introduced ourselves, trying to maintain a sense of calm. With trembling voices, we assured her that we would help her find her campsite. It was the only option we had, and our instinct to help overpowered our fear. As we guided her through the ominous woods, the woman rambled on incoherently, her words a disturbing jumble of thoughts and emotions. She shared fragments of her life, her voice wavering between despair and delirium. It was a disconcerting experience, to say the least. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, we stumbled upon a familiar campsite. The woman's friends, who had been oblivious to her absence, were sitting around a campfire. They greeted her with nonchalant indifference, their faces masked by the eerie dance of the flames. We helped the woman reunite with her unobservant companions, who seemed more interested in their own revelry than in the ordeal she had just endured. They thanked us half-heartedly, too caught up in their own world to fully grasp the gravity of the situation. As we left the campsite, my friend and I exchanged glances once more. We were shaken to the core by the surreal encounter we had just experienced. The forest, which had once been a place of adventure and excitement, had transformed into a realm of unsettling mysteries and chilling uncertainties. We made our way back to our own campsite, our flashlights illuminating the path with newfound caution. The memory of the whispering woman haunted us throughout the night, as we lay in our sleeping bags, unable to shake the feeling that we had crossed paths with something otherworldly and unsettling. In the years that followed, the ritual took on a different meaning for us. The thrill of our nightly adventures was replaced by a lingering unease, a reminder that the darkness of the woods held secrets far more disturbing than we could ever have imagined. The memory of that night serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes, the real horrors are not the monsters that lurk in the shadows, but the darkness that resides within the human soul. It was a moonless night in the heart of a desolate valley, where the echoes of civilization had long faded into oblivion. I was camping alone, far from the confines of cell service and the familiar hum of city life. Lost in the rugged wilderness, I ventured deep into the wilderness on a winding trail that seemed to lead nowhere. As twilight descended, casting eerie shadows, I suddenly encountered a local man. He was an unexpected presence in this remote wilderness. A stranger, but he had the aura of a kind soul. His friendly demeanor put me at ease, and as the darkness settled in, he gestured towards a hidden gem, a local camping spot by the road and the river, camouflaged to perfection. It sounded idyllic, so I followed his lead. A crackling fire soon lit up the night, and the crisp air was filled with the soothing sound of flowing water. The stranger and I exchanged stories under the starry canopy, the flames dancing to the rhythm of our conversation. I cracked open a cold beer, and the camaraderie of the moment felt like a connection to the very essence of the wild. As the night grew older, I decided to indulge in the comfort of my friend's comedy podcast, filling the valley with laughter. I was loud and visible, my presence accentuated by the warm glow of the fire. Despite my boisterous revelry, I couldn't help but notice the inky darkness surrounding me, the woods concealing secrets of the night. Perhaps it was the darkness that made me rethink my plans for the night. Instead of setting up my tent, I opted to sleep in the back of my trusty truck, nestled among my camping gear. It seemed like a pragmatic choice at the time, but little did I know how fortuitous that decision would prove to be. Morning broke with a gentle light, and I awoke to the symphony of a crackling fire and the promise of a new day. I reached for another beer, savoring the solitude of the moment. But then, a movement caught my eye, a dark figure lurking at the edge of my camp. My heart quickened, and I squinted through the morning haze. The figure drew nearer, yet never once did it meet my gaze. He was a man, or at least, he used to be. His haggard appearance was a stark contrast to the friendly local I'd met the night before. His beard hung long and matted, like a veil of darkness, and his clothes were adorned with an oddity that sent shivers down my spine, plastic grocery bags, dozens of them, tied all over his tattered attire. I tried to break the ice, to bridge the gap between us, my voice laced with the same warmth I'd shared with the stranger the night before. "What a beautiful day," I called out, but there was no response, only the disquieting silence of the wilderness. Undeterred, I offered him breakfast, but the words seemed to dissolve into the morning mist. His movements were erratic, pacing the perimeter of my camp like a caged animal. The unease settled in my bones, a creeping sensation that something was terribly wrong. Desperation led me to offer him a beer, my last-ditch attempt to establish a connection. But he remained aloof, refusing to acknowledge my presence. His back was turned to me, his face hidden in shadow, a ghostly presence in the morning light. As he continued to wander aimlessly around the camp, a realization gripped me like a vice: there would be no goodwill, no friendly exchange of stories on this day. The specter that had invaded my solitude was a harbinger of uncertainty, a reminder that nature's beauty could be a mask for its malevolence. Fear gnawed at the edges of my resolve, and my hand reached for the bear spray and the trusty buck knife, kept within arm's reach. In a trembling voice, I gave the stranger an ultimatum, a plea laced with a tinge of anger: "Motherfucker, you are either going to acknowledge me or leave immediately." But my words fell upon deaf ears. He ignored me, his indifference a chilling testament to the enigma that surrounded him. In that moment, I realized that I was facing a situation far beyond my understanding or control. With a mixture of trepidation and determination, I grabbed the bare mace and took a few cautious steps towards him. It was a high-stakes gamble, a desperate bid to protect myself from the unknown. The stranger, in response, sulked away into the shadows, retreating like a specter vanishing into the depths of the wilderness. I wasted no time. I threw my belongings into the truck with haste, my heart pounding like a drum in the echoing silence. In that chilling moment, the unsettling thought crossed my mind: had he watched me throughout the night, lurking in the obscurity, an unseen observer with unfathomable intentions? My gratitude for my own indolence surged within me. Had I not chosen to sleep in the back of my truck, vulnerable yet concealed, the situation might have unfolded differently. It was a silent acknowledgement that my own instincts and precautions had been my salvation. Without looking back, without the luxury of hindsight, I left that eerie place behind. The memories of that encounter, shrouded in mystery, would haunt me for years to come. The valley, once a sanctuary of nature's beauty, had revealed its enigmatic and sinister side, a reminder that even in the wilderness, one must be vigilant and prepared for the unforeseen. The chilling memories of that fateful camping trip still haunt me to this day. It was supposed to be an adventure, a bonding experience with my siblings, but it turned into a nightmarish ordeal that would forever be etched in our minds. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the tranquil lake, we set up our campsite. The air was filled with excitement and the promise of an unforgettable weekend. Little did we know that Mother Nature had her own plans for our adventure. The first ominous sign was the rapidly darkening sky. Clouds gathered ominously overhead, and the cheerful chirping of birds gave way to an eerie silence. We exchanged nervous glances, but the bravado of youth compelled us to carry on, dismissing our fears as mere paranoia. Then, it happened. A deafening crack of thunder split the silence, making us jump in unison. Lightning tore through the heavens, illuminating the lake with an otherworldly, electric glow. The storm had arrived with an intensity we couldn't have anticipated. Rain came down like a deluge, soaking us to the bone in seconds. Our laughter turned to frantic shouts as we scrambled to secure our tent against the impending tempest. But the forces of nature were relentless, and our tent flapped and groaned as it struggled to withstand the furious onslaught. The lightning became more frequent and ferocious, turning the sky into a malevolent canvas of jagged streaks of light. Each bolt seemed to strike perilously close, illuminating the lake in an eerie, blue-tinged brilliance. The thunder that followed was a deafening, unending roar, as though the very heavens were angry with our intrusion into their domain. The winds howled like vengeful spirits, and the rain pounded mercilessly, threatening to tear our tent from its moorings. Panic seized us as the tent seemed to lift off the ground, and we clung to its sides desperately. I could feel the raw power of the storm, an invisible beast trying to pry us from our fragile sanctuary. In that terrifying moment, we had a grim choice to make: stay and risk being swept away by the storm's fury or flee to the car parked nearby. The decision was made for us when our tent, like a fragile toy, was lifted into the air and sent hurtling toward a nearby tree. It was a sight straight out of a nightmare, a surreal dance of nature's wrath. Without a second thought, we abandoned our tent and sprinted through the blinding rain to the safety of the car. As we huddled inside, the car shook violently, as if a colossal hand were trying to crush us. The storm's fury was unrelenting, and fear gripped us like a vice. Through the rain-streaked windows, we watched in horror as our beloved tent collapsed and was twisted into a grotesque, mangled form by the relentless winds. It was a poignant reminder of how powerless we were in the face of nature's fury, a humbling experience that left us trembling with a newfound respect for the forces of the wild. Minutes turned to hours, and still, the storm raged on. The car became our sanctuary, a fragile cocoon in the midst of chaos. We whispered words of reassurance to each other, trying to quell the rising tide of fear that threatened to engulf us. Outside, the world was a maelstrom of wind and water, a realm of primal forces that cared not for our plight. As dawn broke and the first feeble light of day pierced the stormy sky, we made a decision. We couldn't stay in the car forever, and the fear of the unknown compelled us to venture out. Carefully, we stepped into the aftermath of the tempest. The campground was a scene of devastation. Trees lay toppled like giant dominoes, their roots ripped from the earth. Branches and debris were scattered haphazardly, and the once serene lake had transformed into a roiling cauldron of muddy waters. We learned from a park ranger that a small tornado had indeed swept through the campground the previous night, leaving destruction in its wake. Roads were blocked by fallen trees, and it was a miracle that our car had remained unscathed. We wasted no time in cleaning up our campsite, a somber task that felt like a funeral procession for our lost tent. My sleeping bag, too, had vanished into the night, a casualty of the storm's fury. It was a small sacrifice compared to what could have been, but it stung as a reminder of our vulnerability in the face of nature's wrath. As we drove away from that campground, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had come perilously close to a much darker fate. The memory of that nightmarish storm would forever be etched in my mind, a testament to the awesome power of nature and the fragility of human existence. It was a lesson in humility, a reminder that in the grand scheme of things, we are but tiny specks in the vast tapestry of the universe, subject to forces beyond our control. To this day, I shudder at the memory of that camping trip, a haunting experience that serves as a chilling reminder of the raw, untamed power of the natural world. It's a story I share with a mixture of awe and trepidation, a tale of survival in the face of the unknown, and a lesson learned in the harshest of classrooms, the wilderness.